Matt will be speaking to us a little bit later, continuing our series on 1 Timothy. For those of you who were here last week, he started one of the more prickly passages, and we'll be continuing on with that today. So I'm very interested to hear how he goes and what he says about that. But for right now, let's have our Bible readings, and we've got two this morning. The first is from 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 8 to 15. And the second is from Matthew 20, verses 25 to 28. Please follow along in your Bibles or up on the screen, which should be there any second. There we go. I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarrelling. Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness, with good works. Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Yet she will be saved through childbearing, if they continue in faith and love and holiness, with self-control. And from Matthew 20, 25 to 28. But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many."
Good morning, everyone. And once again, welcome to our Sunday service. Very, very glad to have you with us this morning. In case we haven't met, my name is Matt and I'm one of the leaders here at MCC. And this morning we're continuing, as you've hopefully picked up, we're continuing our sermon series through the Apostle Paul's first letter to his protege, Timothy. Just by way of background and a quick refresher, this kind of like little subsection, I suppose, of the entire sermon series is a three-parter. So I'm covering this section of 1 Timothy over the course of 3 parts. So there was last week, there's this week, and there's a fortnight's time. So I strongly encourage you, if you're interested in this particular topic and you want it to make as much sense as possible, then please jump on our YouTube channel and watch last week and make sure that one way or another you catch up to what I presented a fortnight's time as well. And look, for those of you who were here last week, I just want to say thank you for the many offers of Rolexes that I've had in the past 7 days, particularly like the fake ones. Really appreciate that. And also for, it was a little bit disconcerting to be honest with you, but the number of guys that came out of the closet and gave me some looks maxing tips as well. Thanks for that too, guys. Really, really, really appreciate it. Been trying to work on my jawline this week. Hopefully it shows. But going back to the passage. So by background, Paul, the author, was a leader of the early church, and he's credited with writing much of what we see now as the New Testament. Timothy, the recipient of this letter, was a much younger man who Paul had asked to help lead and to some degree bring into line the church at a place called Ephesus, a big bustling city in the then Roman Empire, which you can now still visit in modern day Turkey. Now, we're going to cover only a couple of verses this morning, but you've heard them. You've heard them read out, and you know that they're worth taking the time to go over carefully, given the impression that they make. These couple of verses, are typically pointed to by churches and also church denominations who read them and understand them as biblical commands for women to either not teach or preach, if there are men in the audience, and or justifying why only men can be the most senior leaders of churches. So these verses really matter. They really matter. And it's worth noting that in a room this size, there's a chance that these verses may have caused someone some pain. You or someone you love may have suffered because of how this passage has been interpreted and applied. If that's you, please don't tune out now, but stick with me through this passage. But first, before we go much further, this is Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, later known as Osho. He was a religious leader who built a following first in India through the 70s and then relocated to America in 1981, where he and his followers bought a large, huge ranch in Oregon and built a commune of Rajneeshpuram. This is his chief lieutenant, Ma Anand Sheila. So, these two were both religious leaders. They both had immense spiritual authority for a time. And by the mid-1980s, they were both also infamous. Their followers had to live communally in this ranch, share possessions, all that kind of stuff. Rajneesh, the leader, owned a fleet of 90-plus Rolls Royces. Sheila, his lieutenant, was convicted for mass food poisoning, in addition to wiretapping rooms and phones across the commune and plotting the murder of a couple of key people who were connected to it. Now, here's the thing, really, really interesting. Decades later, because again, this is like the early 1980s, decades later, and after Sheila had done prison time for her crimes, she was still on record as being unrepentant about what she did. She defended her actions by saying they were necessary to protect both the commune and the Bhagwan's religious vision. Food poisoning, wiretapping, plotting murders, prison time, and a Netflix documentary called Wild Wild Country that clearly paints you as being on the wrong side of history, to say the least. And despite all those things, you are convinced that it was the right thing to do for the cause. Now, this may sound extreme, but it's an example of what we talked about last week. The compromises that people can make in order to gain status and control. And perhaps the easiest ones to make are when they are in the service of doing the right thing. So, it's easier to blind yourself to the true end goal, which is going to involve status and control, by telling yourself that you're doing it for the greater good. I mean, of course, no one likes wiretapping the rooms and the phones of your fellow cult members. It's a last resort. But when push comes to shove, it's necessary for the cause. And it's easier to justify really dubious, dodgy means that you end up using when the end that they serve is a noble or even a righteous one. So here's one particular example that I think I'm at risk of sometimes, and I reckon at least some of you could relate to this. I'll make sacrifices for my faith and maybe even church. I'll write or lead the study. I'll get up the front and do the thing if needed. I'll cook the meal, whatever it may be. But on a bad day, it can still come down as a way of gaining status. Look at Matt, he's so committed. And sometimes that can be at the expense of relationships and responsibilities that I'm avoiding or ducking. So, the risk of being an absent father, the risk of being a poor friend, the risk of being a negligent sibling. But hey, people say I'm on fire for God. Gaining status under the guise of religiosity and spirituality and inadvertently hurting other people in the process, Paul saw the risk of this happening in the church at Ephesus and asked Timothy to deal with it. So let me show you. So if you've got your Bibles with you, please crack them open, 1 Timothy chapter 2, or just follow along on the screen. We're going to start at verse 11. Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. This verse and the next are particularly confronting to our modern ears. But I'm going to argue that they don't mean what they appear to on a first impression reading. And I'm fully aware this almost makes it sound like Matt's saying that the Bible isn't saying what it seems to be saying. So let me provide some context, specifically to how it may have sounded to the original audience's ears. Track along with my argument, please, but do your own research and see what you think. So, some context. For starters, remember the social context that the social context that Paul is writing about specifically. Church services, public church services that would have met in large private houses. We have to remember, chances are they would have looked and been experienced in a way that was very different to a typical Sunday morning for us here and now. A likely big difference would have been the seeming lack of structure and the many varied contributions that people would have made. So some of you will remember our series on 1 Corinthians from last year. Paul was asking prophets, for example, to take turns, speak one at a time, don't interrupt each other. Paul asked the church in Corinth to maintain some kind of order in these public meetings, which likely means that there was always a risk of disorder, possible interruptions, disagreements being aired in public in real time, and people speaking out of turn. So that's the first bit of context. The second, remember some of the stuff I mentioned last week. It's likely that in the congregation at Ephesus, there were powerful, well-educated, and politically connected women who had recently become Christians. So it's understandable if they felt at liberty to speak up in public church meetings, to disagree with and maybe even disrespect the leaders of the church at the time. And here's the third piece of the puzzle. We know that there were men, again, presumably teachers within the church that had some degree of spiritual authority, who were spreading false and harmful ideas. They were indulging in speculations, controversies, minor issues that are all taking away from the main thing, the gospel, the very heart of Christianity. Now, according to other passages, both in this letter, 1 Timothy, and the next that Paul writes again to the same person who was helping out at the same church, so 2 Timothy, it appears that a particular group of people within the church were particularly susceptible and at risk of believing, but also propagating this false teaching. And that group were women. So if you turn to, say, 2 Timothy, chapter 3, verses 6 to 7, it reads like this. For among them are those men who creep into households and capture weak women, burdened with sins and led astray by various passions, always learning and never able to arrive at a knowledge of the truth. And there may have been a subset of young widows, again, who are engaging in gossip, who are being busybodies, spreading things about, spreading ideas, and bringing the main thing, the gospel, by extension, into disrepute. So the cause of Christianity was suffering, if you like, because of the reputation that this subset of people, particularly young widows, were building in the community. So this is the context. Wealthy, likely powerful women who have been preyed upon by false teachers in the church and are causing disorder at church meetings by interjecting, propagating dodgy and divisive ideas and taking the focus off the main thing. And it's into this specific context that Paul says, let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. Now, the word quietly doesn't really help us when it comes to the translation. In Greek, so in the original language, the emphasis is on attitude or spirit, i.e., a quiet spirit as opposed to a disruptive, antagonistic, or combative spirit, but not literal physical quietness. So this isn't Paul hushing women at church, saying you can't make any noise. Does that make sense? And to some degree, it's the same with the term submission. There are so many negative connotations with this word, but it's important to remember the context. Again, it's a public church meeting. There would have been people there, leaders, who were trying to teach the congregation. So to submit in this context isn't surrendering your mind. It's not abdicating your personal responsibility for discernment and critical thinking. And it's certainly not only being able to believe and think what they tell you to think. It doesn't get you off the hook for personal responsibility. So submission is don't cause a ruckus during the meeting. Don't be disrespectful. Don't be yelling out or interrupting, which again, in this context, it appears that the women particularly may be more at risk of. That making sense so far? And you don't have to agree with me. Again, you can do your own critical thinking. Please see me afterwards, but hopefully it's making sense. And then in verse 12, I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. So again, we'll take this nice and slow. And I really want to spend some time unpacking a key term here and how it can be interpreted. This is important and we need to do it right. Exercise authority over a man. Paul doesn't want women in Ephesus to exercise authority over a man. Okay. Authority, or have authority. The Greek term translated authority is authentio. And here is both, I guess, like the problem, but also to some degree the other benefit. This term, the Greek term, is only used once in the entirety of the New Testament, and it's here. This makes understanding what it means notoriously difficult, because you can't check what it means in other passages. Does that make sense? This is the only time it's dropped. Here's the thing. Authority and authorities, as we know, can be both positive and negative, or positive or negative, or helpful or harmful. You've got the good kind of positive moral authority of a Mother Teresa versus the terrible, abusive authority of a dictator like Stalin. So the big question is, which one does Paul mean here in this context when he says, I don't want a woman having authority over a man? Does he not want women to bear good and godly authority over men? Or does he not want women to bear negative authority over men? And here's the critical thing, and please, this is the short, condensed version of the argument. Again, see me afterwards for the longer version. But every occurrence of that verb, authentine, prior to AD 312, again, it's not found in the New Testament, but it's found in other literature at the time and beforehand. But every occurrence conveys an authority characteristic of rulers and masters at the top of a secular social hierarchy. So rulers, those in high positions, those who lord it over others. So let's get this. When it comes to working out what kind of authority Paul is saying that a woman shouldn't have over men, the vast majority of examples of that particular specific word that he employed, authentine, all refer to the authority that, say, masters had over slaves, lords had over servants. That is, someone is sitting above someone else on a recognised, stereotypical social hierarchy. So it reflects the kind of social hierarchy and dominance that anyone at that time, including elite and powerful women, would have recognised and maybe even have come from. Now, the case I'm trying to make is that what happens if you contrast that kind of typical authority, self-serving authority, that is so common in the world, and you make it look spiritual? Is that kind of authority the kind that Jesus both taught and exemplified? So we heard it read before from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 20. Jesus says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever will be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. You can see the critical distinction between the two types of authority there. Who ultimately is being served? Is it the one who's wielding the authority, or the one who supposedly it's being wielded for? So compare Jesus from washing his disciples' feet to dying on their behalf, to say someone who is willing to use their authority to spy on their fellow members and believers. For my money, Paul was using a very specific term, a very specific word intentionally, to make a specific point about a specific and all too common form of self-serving authority that can far too easily be given a spiritual veneer. That's what I think. That's my read. So in the original context in Ephesus, it was at least some of the women who Paul commanded to stop teaching and leading the men, because in that context, they were going about it in the wrong way, with the wrong kind of authority. I don't think it's a blanket command for all women in all churches through all times. So as I said last week, in this church, our read of these verses, but not just these verses, but if you like, our entire theology of around men and women, leads us to allow and encourage suitably gifted women to preach and enjoy any leadership position here. other churches who interpret passages like these ones, who interpret them differently, some of them don't. So that's what I think the passage is saying. But please, please, please hear me. Like I said last week, many other good, sincere and smart Christians interpret particularly these two verses differently, which usually leads to very different conclusions. So this interpretation is obviously what they call contested. It's not a slam dunk, but really importantly, I don't think it's a slam dunk on either side, so to speak. And I'd be suspicious and skeptical of anyone on either side, so to speak, who said it was a slam dunk. So that's that. And now we're going to take a quick gear change, and I'm going to try to make the broader point from this passage. Church or spiritual authority can all too quickly descend into and mimic, if you like, typical authority, particularly in relation to how it's actually exercised. So church or spiritual authority can all too quickly descend into and mimic typical authority, particularly in relation to how it's actually exercised. And I think someone is particularly at risk of this if they have any degree of leadership gifting, or maybe even some ambition towards leadership, or if they're used to operating outside of church circles, so in the world, if they're kind of used to operating in a sphere where that non-Christ-like version of authority is exercised. Concessions can so easily be made that unnecessarily and unfairly hurt others. And the kicker is, all of us, right? All of us, we can start off trying to serve and even lead in church, or, forget church, any other community-minded kind of endeavour with the best intentions and still, over time, be compromised. There's this great scene at the start of one of my favourite TV shows, The Bear. So the start of season 4, the first episode. And it's a flashback. And you got the protagonist, Kami. So he's a world-class chef. And he's pitching to his brother, Mikey, the idea that they should start a restaurant together. And Mikey's like, why do you want to start a restaurant? And Kami says, because good memories are made in restaurants. When he thinks back on his childhood, it's only ever good memories that are associated with restaurants. He says people are looked after and made happy in restaurants. They can be places where people go and they aren't stressed and there's no chaos. And Kami says, I know starting a restaurant is hard, but I can do it. I'm good at it. He thinks he's gifted. He knows he's gifted. So a place where people feel happy, a place where people are looked after, a place where people don't experience stress or chaos, right? He says, I can do all that. And then the show snaps back to the present day. And if you've been watching it up to now, you know that despite the noble ambitions and the aims, somewhere along the way of opening a restaurant, Kami has hurt people. He's lost his friends. He's not looked after his customers. He's not false. Instead, he's actually fostered a culture of chaos and stress. And all this is despite his working hard and sacrificing everything. And it's a sacrifice, that's the kicker, right? It's a sacrifice where the gospel, the main thing of Christianity, is such good news for us. Richard Rohr, the Franciscan priest and author, points out that heroic sacrifice can be a Trojan horse of spirituality. Look at me, suffer for this great cause. Look at me, give so much for it. It's a Trojan horse because those very sacrifices can be fundamentally driven by wanting to be superior, admired, and in control. The sacrifice can appear to be all about other people. Maybe it's about serving others. Maybe it's even done in the name of serving God. But at heart, in my honest moments, I know they can actually still be all about me. You may think this is a stretch, but consider the elder brother from the prodigal son, Jesus' parable of the prodigal son. His wayward brother comes home and is reunited with their loving father, who throws a party to celebrate. And what does the elder brother do? He just sits it out and he sulks. Why? Because he did all the good things. He made all the sacrifices. He was the stereotypical good son. And this undeserving younger sibling is getting celebrated instead. But at the heart of Christianity is the message that Jesus sacrificed himself on our behalf so we don't have to earn our way back to God or demonstrate our worth or merit. I don't have to sacrifice my way to admiration and status. I don't have to burn myself out or make moral compromises like treating people badly in order to protect my ego or some grand vision of what, say, the church should look like. The good news of the gospel is that instead of sacrifice, we get to surrender. Like Jesus says in 3 out of 4 gospels, lay down, lose, or renounce your life. Lay down, or lose, or renounce your life. And by life, I think he means the plans, the goals that we've concocted and we so often cling to desperately for happiness and security. I need to do X, Y, and Z. I just need to maintain X, Y, and Z. If only I had X, Y, and Z, then I'd be happy. Then I'd be secure. But the fact is, humans don't have a great track record for knowing what will actually make them happy and secure. We don't like to admit it. It costs us some pride, but sometimes you see it seep out in the culture. There's a movie that's doing the rounds at the moment, popular with the younger people I hear, called Obsession. And it's a horror movie, right? And horror movies have a pedigree at actually kind of showing the risks, if you like, of demonstrating what happens when people get what they want. It's got this plot device called a one-wish willow. It's a novelty toy. And if you had this thing, it'll grant you one wish that you can't take back or reverse. So in the movie, it's all about, I just want this girl to love me more than anyone else in the world. And it goes on to show just how foolhardy and damaging that is. Hence the risk of we actually getting what we think we need and want to make us happy. We are often the worst judges at that. Instead, Jesus says, surrender trying to control your life through these plans and goals. Hand over the reins to me instead. So to close, what may this surrender, this handing over the reins look like for us? Well, in the case of Ephesus and the women there, it meant stop trying to control your life through gaining status from wealth and hairdos, and instead adorn yourself in good deeds, good works. Later on in this letter, we'll get to it, Paul says to the younger widows, stop trying to make the heroic sacrifice of being celibate or virginal. And then all I had to do with the cult of Artemis, and there'll be more on that next time. But instead, Paul says, if you get a marriage proposal, accept it, settle down and raise a family. That comes up in 1 Timothy 5:14. Not grandiose, not heroic, just live a quiet and godly life, as he mentioned earlier on. That was specifically for them, but the principle still holds for us. So, as a suggestion, this week, instead of chasing status, even spiritual status, by heroic sacrifice or by being familiar with the latest interesting and controversial theological ideas or by displays of wealth and status, like whatever it is, instead, consider better loving the people God has already placed in your life and are responsible to or for. So instead of fretting over, say, for example, status and performance at, say, church or your workplace and wondering, am I respected and valued here? Take those people in your life, those ones that you know aren't there by accident, family, close friends, brothers and sisters here at church, and ask the other question, do my family, close friends, spiritual brothers and sisters feel loved and served by me? You can see the difference there, right, between those two perspectives. The first one is all about us. The second one is all about the people that God has called us to serve. Just an idea. And lastly, in a world that seems to be increasingly polarised and forced to take extreme sides and regard the other as the enemy, let's show those outside the church that we can disagree on even this important issue, the roles that women can play in church, but we can disagree while still loving and respecting both the churches and the individuals who have reached different conclusions. Let's not let our beliefs on this issue become another subtle grab for power and status. We're so enlightened compared to those fundamentalists or conservatives. It's even worth avoiding terms like that if we can. I know sometimes they're necessary shorthand, but even it's just one step closer to boxing people into a particular category. Those outside the church need to see us, inside the church, living in such a way that, as Paul said in chapter 1 of this letter, brings glory and honour to God. That's what the world needs to see. Okay, let me pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you that you are obviously so familiar with the way that humans are designed and made. We thank you that you have our best in mind. And I pray we'll continue both through your Spirit and your word and through the support of each other. Help us live lives that are consistent with that even though in the short term can be difficult, it's no fun in the short term laying down our life, renouncing ourselves. But help us both have the trust and also, if it be your will, the experience of benefiting from living this way. And I pray, Father, that we will do so in such a way that as we read, it will bring you glory and it will bring you honour in the eyes of a watching world. Amen.